Welcome back to the Caniac Chronicles, folks. I'm your chronicler, Andy, and this is episode 15 on November 12th. So today we're going to get into discussing the three goaltenders that we've seen so far this season for Carolina. And then we'll end up getting into some standings talk. We're just before the quarter mark of the season. I was just looking at the standings, and pretty much all the teams are within about 5 to 6 games, if not less, before they've hit the quarter mark on the season. So now's about the time when I start actually pulling up the standings to see where teams are. By no means will the final standings at the end of the season look the way that they look today. But today is around this time of year, rather, is sort of where I feel a little bit of dust to settle, enough of the dust to settle at least to begin speaking at least to the standings and where teams lie and that sort of thing. So first we'll get into the goaltending situation. We'll speak about the three guys that we've seen so far this season and where things might be taking us moving forward. And so with that, I'll speak first to Kochetkov. Guy coming off of an injury, whether it was at the end of last season or during the off season, I don't really know. But we didn't see him in the preseason. He obviously didn't start at the beginning of the season. It was just about a week to a week and a half ago, I think, that we finally saw our first start for Kochetkov. And that was that game in New York, MSG, against the New York Rangers. And Kochetkov, shut the lights out in that building. I love when they play Kochetkov against his Russian counterparts across the ice, whether it be Vasilevsky, Bobrovsky, Shesterkin, any of the other Russian goaltenders that are out there. And Shesterkin specifically is definitely one of the better ones to see him play against. He seems to always play his best when that aspect is in play for whatever game it is. I don't know what it is. I guess it's pretty obviously, not more than just pride for his position, but pride for his position from, the country that he grew up in, especially with goaltending. Russia, they've fallen off in a lot of ways since the 1980, Miracle on Ice run, and who they were as a national team then to where they are today. But one thing that they definitely still have command of is like top tier goaltending in ice hockey at large. So I get it. That probably fuels Kochetkov's fire more than anything else. And I know he probably is very conscious about almost everything he's doing during those games when he's facing a fellow countryman across the ice. But he played so well that game. It was really good seeing him play. It was good seeing him in his next game. I think the next game he played was Buffalo, and he had to take some goals against in that game, right? We only ended up winning that game. I think it was 6-3. And it was a pretty tight game pretty much until probably the last 8-7 minutes, something like that. And, one thing that has always kind of gotten to Kochetkov, one sort of slight, I guess that you could call it, against Kochetkov is he tends to get a little distracted in the games. He sort of gets in his own mind. For some of the games, especially when goals start going against him, you can almost see it in him. He gets a little bogged down mentally. It's a difficult thing to just, have one go by you like that and move on and play like it didn't happen almost immediately after that, especially if you're the away team. But of all the positions in hockey, goaltenders need to be the most mentally tough and sound player on the ice, for that reason. Ultimately, any goal against, you can say that the defense didn't do their job. You can say that the offense wasn't back checking. You can say that the support wasn't there for your goalie. But still, on a personal level, when that puck goes by you and it hits that back of the net, you gotta feel. I can't imagine. I don't know what it's like because I never played goalie before, but it's got to be a pretty debilitating position to be in. Ultimately, if you make a play, the play of your lifetime, and it will be on your highlight reel till the end of time. Ultimately, all that was doing was stopping a goal from happening. You have really no ability to take the game into your control at the other end of the ice, in terms of making plays happen in the offensive zone, causing havoc or chaos in the opposite goaltender's crease, putting up screens, whatever it might be to contribute to a goal for your team. You as a goaltender don't have a whole lot of say or direct impact in that capacity. So it's a draining position mentally to play. For the most part, you can only underperform. You can play out of your mind, and you can make saves that you most people, probably 99.9% of other people, wouldn't be able to make those saves. But again, even when you have those types of saves, it's ultimately just stopping one goal. Whether it's a save you made without even realizing a shot was coming, or whether it was a save you made diving across your crease after shifting in the complete opposite direction to block a pass, and then seeing the play change, like halfway through that pass, and being able to recover and just get a tip of the puck with your stick coming back across the crease. It's an impressive thing. It's a completely, it could generate that momentum that the crowd needs, or that the team needs from the crowd. But again, it ultimately just stops one single goal. That's it. So Kochetkov, that's been an area I feel like he's struggled, but thus far, in the small amount of time that we've seen him on the ice, I'm sensing that he has done a lot this season to kind of strengthen himself in that area, in that capacity. He's had two really good opportunities this season now. One where he wasn't really so mentally tested, I don't think, against the Rangers. They did put up a decent amount of shots that game, if I remember correctly. Yeah, 26. So he had a 26 save shutout, which is a really good amount of saves to have made in a shutout. In any game, really, even if some go by you, 26 saves is a pretty solid, shift for a goaltender. Work shift, I mean, not ice shift. But yeah, he looked so solid in New York. He looked so calm, collected, focused. He looked laser focused. Obviously, the stats would agree with that. But he was definitely tested against that game in Buffalo. Definitely, I feel at least one, if not two, of those goals against him in the Buffalo game were a couple that he probably would have really liked to have had back, especially in the immediate moment after the fact. And I'm just glad, like I said, I don't think, at least at this point in time in the season, it doesn't appear to me that Kochetkov is letting, those inner thoughts, those, words and phrases in your mind between the ears get to him and impact his game or affect his game, generally in a negative way. He looks very sound. He looks like that's something that he's been working on in this off season. I think, to be honest, he's a conscientious guy. I almost think it's something he's been working on longer than just this off season. But he recently turned 26. He's beginning to get up there in seniority, and when you start entering that phase of your career, and not just for hockey players or for athletes, you can even extrapolate this to, a regular everyday Joe Schmo type of career. When you start shifting into that first tier of seniority, You have to start kind of finding ways to be better in areas that you haven't previously done so. And again, specifically with Kochetkov, his skill is there, his ability is there. I think ultimately the only thing that's really been holding him back has been that mental strength that we not necessarily it's not necessarily been demonstrated yet to us. And so far this season, I'm liking what I'm seeing. Unfortunately, and we'll end up getting to it now that Anderson is out, or fortunately or unfortunately, now that Anderson is out, we should end up seeing a bit more of Kochetkov, and we'll see, what ends up happening in that capacity as we move forward in this season. But for now, the guy looks good. I'm glad he's back. He's sitting at a .938 save percentage on technically 3 games played, but again, it was just about a minute to 2 minutes maybe in that Capitals game that he had to cover. And so with that, I guess normally I think in my mind I was going to go to Brandon Bussey next, but we'll move into Anderson since I was sort of alluding to it in the conversation about Kochetkov. But Anderson, has played the most amount of games so far this season for the Canes. He's played in 9 total games. He's looking at a 3 goals against average and a .892 save percentage with no shutouts so far this season. On top of all of that, yesterday in the Capitals game with I want to say it was about 5 minutes or just past 5 minutes left in the game, Anderson takes a awkward hit from Stahl, his own teammate. And Stahl ended up kind of falling through the hit, and eventually, falling on Anderson in the process. Anderson I think he got up under his own weight. He was down for a little while when he first went down. He also took a hit earlier in the game that ended up turning into a pretty big scrum with him included in it. So, he was kind of already beaten up that game. That game against Washington is getting to be a very physical game. It's clearly, the not interstate rivalry, but the Capitals and the Canes are the 2 closest teams. Well, for us, they're the closest team to us. I guess the Flyers are probably closer to Washington than we are, and maybe even the Devils. But the Devils, the Flyers, they kind of fit into that major metro vibe. And even though Washington does play out of D.C., I do feel like they get a decent amount of that Southern hockey fan crowd coming to see them. And that's largely what we get at our games, is that Southern fan of hockey. And so that Southern fandom, that commonality between us, as well as the proximity between the 2 franchises, a decent amount of their fans come down to see us when, the Capitals come to town, and vice versa. And I think I really like that. I've been really enjoying that rivalry that's been brewing. I like seeing all the Canes fans in Washington. My wife and I went to a game. I think it was March of 2024 or maybe 2025. It was one or the other. But we ended up going up to see a game with our friends up there who happen to be Capitals fans. And it was really cool to hear that audible celebration when the away team scored a goal during that game, because there was enough Hurricanes fans in attendance to make a noise. Similarly, when Washington is here in Carolina, there's a good, roar from the crowd that happens whenever they score. But again, it's all well and good. Anyways, I'm sort of belaboring the point. I'll move on. Anderson ends up getting injured last night, 5 to 5.5 minutes left in the game. I guess he was pulled on failing the concussion protocol, like the concussion trainer or the concussion spotter. I think that's what it was. The concussion spotter pulled him out. of that game, which ended up turning the reins over to Kochetkov with just a few minutes left in duty. It's unfortunate, you never want to see a player like that go down, especially when it's, friendly fire from a teammate. One thing that, I don't think many people are going to want to hear this or like to hear this, but this is sort of the MO of Frederik Andersen. Getting injured in the middle of the season, for better or for worse, it happens to him pretty regularly. And that's not to knock him or his game in any capacity. Some of the best players out there ended up missing large portions of their career because of injuries. I think the best example of it is Ken Griffey Jr. He missed so much time in his career due to injuries. That debate kind of comes up between me and my baseball friends from time to time about how much more could we have seen from Ken Griffey if he played all those games, or even a fraction of all those games that he missed. But Andersen goes down this season. He's back on the I. I don't know if he's back on the IR. They haven't made an announcement yet, but I do believe he has dealt with concussion issues in the past, and that never bodes well for a concussion. That's one of those injuries that the more of those you have, I think it's even an exponential growth. The more detrimental exponentially those injuries can be if you have had prior instances of that injury. So it's unfortunate. It's also, again, I hate to say it like this, and I don't mean this in any joking sort of way, but it's almost the status quo at this point with Andersen to see him miss time for the season due to injury. And it's just a matter of fact. It's not a knock against him. It's just a matter of fact with him. This tends to happen. But we're in a situation this season where, if it's going to happen, this is a situation you want to have behind the guy who gets injured. If it's going to happen. Because Kochetkov, coming off of his injury, I'm sure he's doing a lot better. I do hope that he ends up staying healthy among all three of them. The other two, Bussy and Kochetkov, I do hope that they stay healthy. I do hope Andersen gets healthy in a very, speedy manner. But the Kochetkov-Bussy tandem, I'm very, very excited I'm very, very much looking forward to seeing how this goes. Bussy has performed exceptionally for Carolina this season in the few games that we've seen him play. We all know Kochetkov has the potential. I think he just needs to see more games. If I'm Rod Brendamore, and I'm not, by no stretch of the imagination, but if I'm Rod Brendamore, I'm probably going to be playing Kochetkov as the starter and leveraging Bussy as, the guy who takes over maybe once every 4 to 6 games to give Kochetkov a break. Or if Kochetkov needs more breaks, if Kochetkov prefers to be playing the 1A, 1B style, then I would defer to him on that. But again, if I'm the head coach and it's my decision unilaterally, I'm going with, because again, in my opinion, I have not seen Kochetkov play hey, you're the starter all season long. It's your game until you say otherwise. He has never been put in a position to play like that. And some goalies, Connor Hellebuck, seem to play better when that's the way they're utilized. So I'd like to see Kochetkov utilized that way and see what happens. See if it's worthwhile. But again, solid backup for Andersen while he rests, while he gets better. Hopefully it's a minor concussion or a mild concussion or something like that, and he can recover pretty quickly. I guess for the fact that it's not like a physical injury, like a torn something or a pulled something or other, for the fact that is the case, that's good. That's reassuring. It's I guess the concussion is still technically a physical injury, but it obviously has brain implications and implications with your mind that you need to kind of let it heal far more than you really should, or than you really would with like a broken leg or something that has a little bit more of a concrete timetable behind it. Concussions you really want to take your time with to let them clear up and let the brain heal in the way that they need to before you let that player get back into action. So we'll see what happens there. Wishing the best for Anderson and hoping he can come back soon, suit back up again in the near future. And also, one last thing I want to mention about Anderson is he is in the final year of his contract. He just turned 36. If a team is going to sign him again to next season, he'll be 37 for that season. He's definitely getting up there in age, especially when you consider his position. It'll be interesting to see what happens to Freddie Anderson at the end of this season going forward. I don't necessarily think, if I'm Carolina, that I would entertain going to sign him again, unless you have a very specific, very limited role in mind to use him with, such as being that third sort of taxi goalie who kind of rides the bench until one of the two starters, one of the 1A or the 1B starter, ends up going down for whatever reason. So then moving on to the third and final goalie we have to talk about today, it's Brandon Bussi. Bussi is about a year older than Kochetkov. He's 27. He's having a great season. He's got an 8.98 save percentage with a 2.6 goals against average, and he's got 4 wins in a total of 5 games played. So you'd love to see that from Bussi. His only loss comes against Dallas, which was in Dallas, and he still posted a 9.12 save percentage in that game. So really reassuring stuff to see. He struggled against Toronto the other night, but really the whole team was struggling in that game. And he almost posted a shutout against San Jose on October 14th. He had a 9.41 save percentage there. I think that was the game that there were no shots in the third period, if I'm not mistaken. But again, Bussi, really entertaining goaltender to watch. He's a southpaw, so he catches with his right hand, holds his stick with his left. That's a really cool thing to see. There's not many goalies in the NHL that do that. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, and I've kept my numbers straight, I believe there are only 3 goalies in the NHL that catch with their right hand and play their stick with their left. And I believe 2 of them are on Washington, if I'm not mistaken. So, Bussi looks great. He's a very agile goalie. The thing that most impressed me with Bussi is his decision-making in terms of positional play. I think one of the defining aspects or attributes of a NHL goaltender between an elite one and a very, very, very good one is positional play. And specifically what I mean by that is goaltenders who are so textbook with the way they position themselves that even when a shot gets through that they're not necessarily able to track for one reason or another, they still end up making a save simply because they've put themselves in a position to make a save. The number one guy I can think of that comes to mind when I mention that is Vasilevsky. Bobrovsky is another good one. Goalie, I hate to say it, goalies who win championships have this quality about them. They're very good positionally. They're very good at making saves when they really shouldn't. Again, when there's so much traffic in front of the net that you don't even see the shot, when there's a tip on the shot coming in and you still make the save. It's such a quick thing that happens in the game, but from my perspective and in my opinion, it is a invaluable thing that goes on in the game that really deserves more credit, I think, than it gets. And again, Vasilevsky, Bobrovsky, two guys that are very, very good at this. And you'll see them in the postseason probably. Because in the postseason, goal scoring goes down, so we have a lot less in terms of a highlight reel to look at. So they'll spend that time on those replays when it does happen, and you'll see in slow motion the tip, 6 feet in front of the net, the tip that comes through that changes the trajectory of the puck, and how the goalie has no vision of it but still makes that save somehow. Or the puck that comes through without even being tipped, it's just a screen because there's 5 or 6 players standing right in front of you, and you still make that save. The puck still hits you in the shoulder or hits you in the hip, wherever it hits you. Those moments will come, and so if you're watching TV in the postseason and you see that happen, remember that. That's in my opinion a defining characteristic of an elite goaltender. And that's what Brandon Bussey has shown so far this season, and his numbers support that. If you're making saves when you shouldn't be because you don't even see the puck coming through, then you're going to be boosting your numbers a lot because you technically shouldn't have made that save. You didn't see the puck. And he's a young guy. Again, 27. Kachekhov's 26, so he's the youngest out of the three. But again, I'm very excited to see how Rod utilizes this tandem between Bussey and Kachekov, and I'm excited to see how they end up performing. They both have a lot at stake here. Bussey, kind of a journeyman now at this point. I think he would really like to settle into an NHL team, and obviously one that could go all the way and win him a cup. And Kachekov has a lot to prove too, because he's been around now for about 5 seasons or maybe a little more than that. And we really just haven't gotten from him, I think, what we really need so far. And again, I don't think he's ever utilized in the postseason in a way that is fair to him, but he always does his best. He for whatever reason, he always gets put in the Eastern Conference Finals when we're down, 2-0 or 3-0 already, and the series is kind of gone at that point, and you're just kind of giving Kachekov the keys to be like, hey, close up shop when you're done. It's sort of how I feel that it would be received if I was him, or that message would be received if I was him. So I'd really like to see the two of them do very well this season moving forward while they relieve Anderson as he nurses his injury. So now we will take a look at the standings. So again, I think enough of the initial dust has settled here. It is now worthwhile to look at the standings and see what we're looking at. We're just a few games under the quarter mark on the season. Specifically, Carolina has about 4 more games to play before we hit the quarter mark. And every other team is at about 4 or 5, with the exception of a few who have about 5 or 6, I guess, left before they hit the quarter mark. But nonetheless, a quarter of the games, roughly, have been played. And let's take a look at where everything's at. So in the Eastern Conference, so we're going to be looking at this as if it's the playoffs. So we'll talk about the 3 divisional teams for each division, and then the wild card, and kind of where things are at with the conference as a whole. So in the Atlantic Division, we've got Montreal on top, believe it or not, with a 10-4-2 record. That's 22 points and 16 games played. Montreal's playing very well this season. It's really good to see, to be honest, because they've got a coach up there, Martin St. Louis, who holds a lot of nostalgia in my eyes as a hockey fan, and I would really like to see be successful, especially given the similarity between him being a former player who's won a Stanley Cup and now is a coach for a team who maybe one day could win a Stanley Cup. Who knows? Cole Caulfield out in Montreal is playing, just like the team, is playing exceptionally well and having a great career season, in Montreal. He's he's on the smaller side, and that is one thing that pretty much every analyst is talking about, is that he is with the exact right coach for him, given his undersized stature in the NHL, similar to Martin St. Louis when he was a player. And so he can get a lot of good insight from Marty as a coach to a player, because of that similarity there. There isn't really an owner's manual out there on how to become an NHL superstar, but there certainly isn't one out there on how to become an undersized NHL superstar. So Marty St. Louis is probably the closest thing to that for him, and it's clearly paying dividends now in his second or third season as the coach there. So Montreal's doing great. It'll be cool to see if they stay up there in the standings or not. We've got about 3/4 of the season left, so they've got a ways to go, but they started it off very strong. You got to be excited if you're a Canadiens fan. Really, all three teams from the Atlantic you could kind of put into that conversation. Boston runs up in second place with an 11-7-0 record with 22 points in the standings. And you'll notice that they are ranked in second relative to the Canadiens, and that is simply because they have played more games, so their point percentage is actually lower than Montreal's, so that's why Montreal is listed in front of them. Boston is, in my opinion, having a bit of a Cinderella start to the season. It'll be very interesting to see if they maintain this pace. They're on a 7-game winning streak at the very moment right now, which means that they actually started the season 4-7-0. So without that 7-game win streak they're looking very rough. So I don't know if my Boston buddies are listening to this, but if you are, you tell me how you're feeling. I don't necessarily think they're the real deal. I know I'm saying this, and we're Carolina, and we just were beat recently by them 2-1. But again, I wouldn't have expected Boston to have the start that they've had to this season, although they have done it in a way, that kind of turned around what looked like a pretty bad start to the season. To where we are today. So that just goes to show that anything can happen in any amount of games, and there's still plenty of the season left to be played. So again, we'll see if they can continue that. And then third place in the Atlantic is Ottawa. They're 8-5-4, so they're rocking 20 points there in the standings with 17 games played. They're dealing with injuries, just like a lot of teams are, if I'm not mistaken. They recently released a new jersey too, as you can see. I'm wearing I finally got it. I got a unexpected performance bonus at work, and so I decided, I had put it out of my mind, but the bonus covered it and then some. So I was excited to get the jersey last night for the recently released away jersey. But Ottawa recently released their alternates. Really fresh jerseys. I really like the alternates that they released. I'm also a very big fan of Brady Tkachuk. Both Tkachuk brothers ultimately, but I kind of became I specifically mentioned that I'm a Brady Tkachuk fan because I'm actually a fan of trying to get him or somebody pretty much exactly like him onto Carolina. Back probably a year ago or so, and maybe even a little bit at the beginning of the podcast, before, I don't remember if we started before or after the Miller and Ehlers stuff, but anyways, before the Miller and Ehlers stuff went down this offseason, I had kind of very fantasy-like imagined it would be really great if Carolina could make a move on Brady Tkachuk and get him to come to Carolina and leave Ottawa. I think he would have been a major asset for Carolina. I think his type of gameplay is something we lack, and it would be extremely valuable to have, specifically in the postseason. A player like Brady Tkachuk, a player who's not only very extremely highly talented, but also a guy who can get in your face, push all the right buttons at all the right times, and really get inside your head throughout the course of a game and specifically a postseason series. I think that would have been a major, major asset that Carolina could have gotten if they got him. But yeah, Ottawa's sitting there at third place in the Atlantic. They did make the playoffs last year. They were one of the three teams here who are currently ranked in the top three for the Atlantic division that did make the playoffs. So they're sort of where we expect them to be, although it's very possible they end up falling to a wild card position before the season ends. But they've had a pretty solid start to the season. Could definitely be a bit better. In fact, they're the only team I'm looking at in the East that is currently in a playoff spot that has a negative goal differential against them. So there's a lot that they could improve upon. Obviously, an 8-5-4 record isn't all that great. If it wasn't for all those points in overtime, they might not even be in that third spot for the Atlantic. Moving into the Metro, so the Devils, the on-fire Devils, they basically took that shellacking from Carolina to open the season and went to seek, vengeance across the rest of the NHL after that. They're 11-4-1 with 23 points. That's 16 games played. And they're 1 point ahead of Carolina in the standings. New Jersey's an up-and-coming team for sure. We saw that last season with them. They're young in the sense that they have guys like the two Hughes brothers. They have a pretty moderately aged Nico Hischier at captaincy, and they have a great defensive line too with Pesce and Hamilton, two former Carolina Hurricane defensemen. And they're also kind of dealing with injuries just like Carolina is at this point. So they're getting the job done even with a suboptimal roster on hand. So good for them. Kudos to them. Honestly, the only thing I have to say about that is it comes down to the month of May. Can you beat Carolina in the month of May? That's the big question. And then speaking of Carolina sits at 11-5-0. With 22 points on the season. That's 16 games played. I don't have a whole lot to say about Carolina right now. I like where they're at in terms of wins and losses. I don't love it. I would definitely like to see 2 or 3 of those games in the lose column move over to the win column, or at least the overtime loss. But what can you do? They also kind of stole 2 points out from underneath Toronto the other night by staying in that game till the very end and winning it before regulation ended. So you can also say it. There are some points that probably could have gone the other way in the standings, but nonetheless, Carolina is where Carolina is. And then in third place for the Metro, we have the Penguins. So the Penguins are 9-5-3, 21 points, 17 games played. Really good to see from Pittsburgh. They're in a weird status. They're in a weird state of like sort of going through a rebuild, but not going through a rebuild because you still have the older guys like Letang and Malkin and Crosby who are still there, but a good amount of the new guys coming through as well. We'll see what happens with Pittsburgh. I don't necessarily think that they'll hang on to that position. The Metro specifically is going to be a very difficult division this season to make the playoffs in. And really the East as a whole. I mean, I even think the Atlantic division will be too, because I think they'll put more of a push on the wild card this season. So those wild card teams won't necessarily just be, Metro 4 and Metro 5 like they seemingly always are. They actually might have some competition from the Atlantic this year. So we'll see. And then in the 1 and 2 wild card positions, we have with the same exact record, the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Philadelphia Flyers at 8-5-2 with 18 points and 15 games played. And you notice I haven't even mentioned Florida. In fact, I could list off the next 4 teams in the Eastern Conference for the wild card race, and I still wouldn't have said Florida Panthers. This just goes to show you how tight this race is out in the East, right? Even the Islanders, they're almost identical records to the two wildcard teams. They're 8-6-2 with 18 points, but they've played 16 games. That's why they aren't tied with either of those teams. We also see the Detroit Red Wings, who are 9-7-0 with 18 points and 16 games played. Again, the New York Islanders and the Red Wings have played a game extra compared to Tampa Bay and Philadelphia, and that's why they're sitting outside of those wild card positions. And then we go to the Rangers. Yeah, first the Rangers at 8-7-2, 18 points, 17 games played. They're thankful that they've been able to play on the road this season because they've only generated one win and one overtime loss, as far as I remember, from their home games. So almost all of their points in the standings have come from their away games. So bit of a rickety start there for New York. I don't necessarily know it's all that surprising. It's not to me. It's not to a lot of my friends and peers. But I'm sure to some fans, it's a bit of a shocker to see the New York Rangers sort of struggling like this. But again, 3/4 of the season left. There's plenty of jockeying that will go down between now and then. In fact, the wild card positions, there's only one team in the wild card race, quote unquote, who isn't within 1 point of those positions, and that's Buffalo. We've got 4 teams with 17 points, and we've got 5 teams with 18 points, and they're all right there in the mix. Florida at 8-7-1, tied with Washington at 8-7-1, as well as the Blue Jackets at 8-7-1. And then we have the Maple Leafs at 8-8-1, essentially the same record with just an extra loss in the mix. It's interesting, this is one of the reasons why I'm not too upset about that loss last night against the Capitals. It stung, it sucked. It was our first regular season game that we were able to make it to, and the Canes really looked like the game. They did not look like themselves right out of the gate. They looked like they were sluggish. They looked like they weren't ready to play hockey at that point in time. And I can't blame them. They've had a very, grueling schedule thus far in the season. So it's understandable that, not everybody is there at 100%, 110%. But it would have been great to see them win last night. But here's the thing. Washington, desperately needed that win last night. Carolina, not so much. So it makes sense to me, that the Capitals come out, especially after the loss last year in April. We went to that game because, Ovi was still chasing the record. And Carolina really mopped the floor with Washington in that game. We took it to them physically. We took it to them on the scoreboard. They didn't have a whole lot of wiggle room. They scored 1 goal that game, and it was the Ovi goal, if I'm not mistaken. Whereas I think we had 4 or 5 in that one. So they were seeking revenge last night, excuse me. They were definitely seeking revenge in that game. They absolutely pretty much needed that game, to keep pace with all these teams that they're surrounded by. Points are going to come at a premium here, and even in the divisional spots, it's not going to be a comfortable race for, I think, any of these teams. Any of these teams have a roster capable of taking one of these playoff spots from any of the current teams that are sitting in them, in my opinion. And then lastly, we have Buffalo sitting at 5-6-4 with 14 points and 15 games played. I hate to say it, this is the Buffalo Sabres MO. Nothing changes from season to season. In fact, they're actually a little bit off in the sense that I think they sort of tend to overperform at the beginning of seasons, and then by the time Thanksgiving rolls around, they start falling back into their full-blown Buffalo ways. But this season, they seemingly out of the gate have gotten right to that, Sabre style of hockey, which doesn't involve a lot of winning, unfortunately. But we'll see what they can do. We'll see what they might do for moves throughout the season. I don't know that there's a whole lot there that can be put together during the season. We'll see. We'll see. It's tough. It's a team that's kind of near and dear to me because it's my brother and my cousin's favorite team. But at the same stroke, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. And you almost sort of sense that from the franchise or the organization's perspective, that is what they're fully comfortable with doing. Finding a top-tier all-star like Jack Eichel or Tage Thompson and just driving them out of town because of how depressing it is to be a Sabre in the NHL. You hope that doesn't happen with Tage Thompson. He's a great player. You heard Nick talking about him last week in the bonus episode and how much he likes him. The stats also support, all the talk that Nick provided on Tage. So you really hope to see that guy succeed, especially in Buffalo. It would be good to see the franchise succeed as a whole soon. But, at this point in time, if history repeats itself, I hate to say it, but we might see Tage Thompson walking out of Buffalo in the near future, 4 or 5 years. We'll see. I won't get into the West too in depth, but we'll read out the division leaders at this point. Colorado in the Central Division, 11-1-5 with 27 points. That's 17 games played. And then we see Dallas Stars at 10-4-3 with 23 points and 17 games played. And then the Winnipeg Jets at 10-6-0, 20 points, 16 games played. Pretty much status quo in that division. It's usually those three teams in that or some other order. And then in the Pacific, it's been pretty much mixed up heavily in the Pacific. We have the Anaheim Ducks sitting at first, who are having a magical season thus far. They're 11-4-1 with 23 points. That's 16 games played. We then see the LA Kings with an 8-5-4 record, 20 points, and that's 17 games played. And then the Seattle Kraken with a 7-4-5 record, 19 points, and 16 games played. Edmonton, very similar to the Florida Panthers, see themselves outside of the playoff race, sitting at fifth in the wild card chase at 7-6-4, 18 points, and 17 games played. They're actually playing right now against Philadelphia, and I don't know what the score is there. But that's kind of a big game for Edmonton. They really need that win. And that's also a very big game for Philly. Philly's the bottom wild card team right now, so they definitely need those points. Edmonton definitely needs those points. That's actually probably a pretty good game to be watching, I would imagine, which I will be doing soon. Because that is all the conversation I have about the Carolina Hurricanes today. Again, those three goalies performing very well together in a tandem or a trandem or a tridem. I don't know what the word is there for a triplet, but those three goalies are holding up. Anderson, definitely went down with an injury and left the game early recently, but hopefully it's not too much of an injury or a concern to have with him, and he gets back suited up soon. But I have full faith in Bussy and in Kochetkov and being able to provide this team that brick wall and net that they'll need, as they walk through this season. So, anyways, with that, folks, thank you for listening. I do appreciate your time if you are here tuning in regularly. I look forward to talking next week about what the Canes have done in the week between now and then. But for the time being, I do hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care, and we'll talk later.